Hey y'all, welcome back to Lit Whiskey Wednesday, where the lit stands for literature. Around here, not many things change because this is your host, Adrian Martinez, coming to you live from Studio B. Y'all, we have a heck of an episode today. I was so close to making this a season finale. It barely missed a cut, and if I'm being completely honest, I was not patient enough. I had to talk about this as soon as I finished the book, because, I finished the book like 2 days ago. And I just had to talk about it. It became, honestly, top 5 books I've ever read. Completely unexpected. I am talking about the one and only Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafon. To tell y'all the truth, I had not heard about this book until a few weeks ago. The only reason I heard about it is because I was talking to people, to my wife, to friends, to ChatGPT, because I don't actually have friends. No, I was talking to people about the show and about all the whiskeys I was going to cover, and there was one that was just stumping me, and it was the one that we're going to talk about today. I did not know what book really fit the vibe, but I knew the vibe I was going for. And almost unilaterally, everyone said, Shadow of the Wind. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a little spooky that everybody's saying the same thing. So I went ahead and got it, and to tell you the truth, it did take me a little bit to get into it. But once I got into it, I couldn't stop. I went through half of the book in maybe a day and a half. And that book's a brick. It's like 500 pages, or a little bit more than 500 pages. So in 2 days, I went through like 250 pages because I had to know what happened. So if you were to ask me what I rate this book in a 5-star scale system, which, most book apps use anyways, I would give it 6 stars. And I know what you're thinking. I'm hungry. No, seriously. 6 out of 5 stars, that doesn't make much sense. The way that I like to describe it is, if a book has 6 stars, it means that I am actually upset that I can't read this book for the first time ever again. But hey, don't you worry. The book that we're covering next week is also a 6 star, so we're closing out the season strong. So gather around, kids, and let's dive into the book. Let me set the mood. Picture yourself in Spain, more specifically in Barcelona, in around the 1940s, and almost imagine that the world around you, the color starts depleting, and you're in the middle of like a black and white movie that's really kind of yellowy, but we're not going to get into that debate. So picture a introduction to Phantom of the Opera, but in reverse. The hustle and bustle of the city goes on around you, but in front of you stands an alleyway, a dark alleyway. An alleyway that you've never seen before, but you've definitely been around here, so it has an air of familiarity. You step inside, and you see hundreds of thousands of books. Books that can tell stories that many people have forgotten by this point. The top of the alleyway says, Welcome to the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. Do I have your attention yet? In case you haven't read it yet, here's a short summary of what The Shadow of the Wind is about. Set in post-Civil War Barcelona, the story follows a young boy named Daniel Sempere, who is taken into a mysterious place called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, a hidden labyrinth where abandoned stories are preserved. There, he chooses a novel called Shadow of the Wind, written by an obscure author named Julian Carax. What begins as simple curiosity turns into an obsession. As Daniel grows older, he sets out to learn more about Carax, only to discover that someone has been systematically destroying every copy of his work. His search pulls him into a web of secrets stretching across decades, filled with love, loss, betrayal, obsession, and the lingering scars of the past. Ooh, I wish you could see it. I got goosebumps just from reading that. Making up that summary on my head just now, because that's exactly what I just did. Yeah. It's hard to know exactly what to talk about for this story, just because there are things that you find out throughout the story, not just at the end. So there's stuff at the beginning that comes into the middle, stuff in the middle that comes into the end. It all ties together just so beautifully, like the labyrinth, the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. So I'm not gonna go very deeply into the plot because it's almost even more beautiful going into it blind. But I do want to talk about the 3 main themes of the story because they are very applicable to real life. The first one is the blurred lines between the past and the present. The truth is that the past always comes back, it doesn't stay buried for long. And our actions, our history always comes back to us and is part of our day-to-day life. The second one is the different types of love and where they apply in your life. So, for example, there is romantic love, friendly love, enduring, platonic, infatuation. There are different types of love, but not everything or everyone will be able to check off every single one. So, to give you a personal example, my wife and her family are very vocal about their love, which is a great thing. However, I come from a very different background where the word love is not all-encompassing. And so we've had, not disagreements, but we've had funny moments where her family would tell me that they love me, and I thought that was kind of weird, because where I come from, the word love is reserved for a romantic partner. What you tell, your family members or friends is te quiero, but te amo, which is I love you, is reserved solely for your romantic partner. So when my father-in-law tells me that he loved me, I was like, your daughter's like right there. And lastly, and in my opinion the most important one, is the power of stories. And the reason for this is because stories, they shape who we are. They shape our identity and our memories and the things that we're able to pass down to others. So let me give y'all a very personal example. I've been spending the past year trying to get to know my grandparents. Here's the thing. My grandma passed away like 8 years ago, so I was still in college. And my grandpa passed away before I was even born. So, as far as my grandpa goes, there was no way I could have gotten to know him personally. And if I did, that would be the beginning of a very creepy movie. But my grandma, I did get to know her. However, I was a kid. And after I was a kid, I was a snotty teenager. Then I went off to college. I didn't have the maturity to want to get to know my grandma to that level until after she was gone. So I took advantage of a lot of things. One, living by myself during the pandemic, to learn a new hobby, which was cooking. And I know that this kind of took a bit of a left turn. Just trust me, it ties into everything. So I started cooking and I became curious, what my mom used to cook, what my grandma used to cook. And with the help of one of my cousins and one of my aunts, I started finding all of these recipes of what she used to make. And so I've been working for like the last year and a half on a cookbook of the things that she used to make. As far as my grandpa goes, there was no way for me to personally get to know him. I don't own a Ouija board, so there's like literally no way I could get to know him. So I've been interviewing my aunts and my uncle, but primarily my dad. And I'm never going to forget. This is one of those stories that will live with me for the rest of my life. And I'm going to tell my kids about it because if you've seen How I Met Your Mother, you know that's what happens. So I told my dad, hey, for your birthday, I want you to come up to the house and I'm going to take you out to dinner and it's going to be great. And the next day, we're driving up to Dallas. And he was like, why? I told him, we're going to start out by going to the AT&T Stadium because both my dad and I are diehard Cowboys fans. Feel free to put your hatred in the comments. I'm well aware that the Cowboys suck. But you know what? The stories that I have to share about watching the Cowboys with my friends, with my family, that is going to live with me until the day I die. So I am going to be a Cowboys fan until the day I die, even if they never win a Super Bowl, which will probably be the case. Anyways, I told them we're going to go to the AT&T Stadium and we're going to tour it. Then I'm going to take you to this museum that was where Lee Harvey Oswald lived. And I know y'all are probably thinking that is such a weird museum, but my dad is obsessed with the theme or the story of JFK. Just from his presidency to his assassination and the conspiracy behind it, it's a subject that he loves. So I was able to find this museum that turns out is not a museum. It's actually the apartment that he lived in. It's intact. It looks like it's 1963, and the granddaughter of the lady that owned it runs it. So I took him and we were able to talk to the lady who was a little girl in 1963, and my dad was he was a kid in a candy store. He absolutely loved it. And at that point in time, this was, I believe, last year, I was still relatively early in my whiskey journey, which I still kind of am. But I asked my dad, hey, I've grown into liking whiskey. I've developed a like for whiskey. Did my grandpa ever drink whiskey? And he said, you know what? He did. He did. And he had his preferred brand. And I was like, oh, well, what is it? So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you the whiskey for today's episode, Grand Old Parr 12-year. Grand Old Parr is a blended scotch that is rich with history. The company was created in 1871 by James and Samuel Greenless, and they launched in 1909 from when they moved to Scotland from London. The Greenless brothers were inspired by the story of Thomas Parr. What's that, you say? You haven't heard about Thomas Parr? Gather round, children. Thomas Parr was an English farmer who lived, according to legend, from 1483 to 1635. He was supposedly 152 years old when he died. I don't know about you, but I'm 30 years old. I don't know if I have that much in me already. Totally kidding. It's not that kind of show. But my back does hurt like I've been around for 152 years. Anyways, the Greenless brothers were inspired by what he represented. His long lifespan and the wisdom that he must have acquired could be translated in, at least in whiskey terms, to the maturity that whiskey needs to have in order to be at the right level before release, and the knowledge and skill that it requires to create whiskey, whether it's a single malt or a blend. But they were inspired very deeply by his story and by that time frame, so much so that the front of the label has an image of a portrait of Thomas Parr. And even the bottle is in the shape of some of the tavern glasses from that time frame of like the 1500s, which I want to expand a little bit on the bottle. It's actually a really unique type of bottle because it's not that long cylindrical type of whiskey bottle that we all know. It might as well be a teacup because it's short and stout. But other than the shape, there's one added element that I think makes this bottle very unique. And that's that the glass itself, it looks like almost wrinkled, if that makes any sense. So here, I'm putting the bottle next to the microphone, and I'm going to pass my fingernail just by the glass. That little thing that you're hearing, that's the sound of the wrinkles from the bottle. It almost looks like cracked leather. So that just kind of ties it even more into this theme of stories, because if you think of a leather-bound book that's just been around for hundreds of years, the leather's eventually going to crack and going to look a little bit like this bottle. But before we talk about the whiskey itself, I want to finish talking about Thomas Parr, because I know I left it at a weird, almost unbelievable part that he was 152 years old when he died. So legend has it that he was scheduled to meet King Charles I, and this was arranged by Thomas Howard, the 21st Earl of Arundel. And so the king asked him, hey, what's your secret? To which Thomas Parr said, a lot of sunscreen. No, he actually said, I am paying penance for fathering an illegitimate child at 100 years old. To which the king was speechless. He did not know what to say. Which, to be fair, what do you even say to that? If someone came up to me and said, hey, I fathered a child when I was 100 years old, the first thing that's going to come out of my mouth is, it still works? So, here is where the story takes a bit of a dark turn. That trip was the cause of Thomas Parr's death. It's unknown exactly what caused his death. The king and many people theorized that it was the heavy air of London or the very rich food or something that his system was just not used to, that after multiple days his system just shut down. But because he felt responsible for his death, Charles I ordered for Thomas Parr to be buried in Westminster Abbey, which his grave is still there, and the years of 1483 to 1635 are still there. If you don't want to believe it, I can't make you believe it. I am just a voice. But his grave is there, and it says that he lived to be 152 years old. So that's the story behind Grand Old Parr. And I know that this took a wild turn into the history section of the whiskey, so let's start talking about the whiskey itself. So as I mentioned earlier, Grand Old Parr is a blended scotch, and so what that means is that this whiskey is composed of many different scotches from all across Scotland. And the primary components of this particular blend is Cragganmore and Glendolin. So here we're going to open the bottle. It does not have that cork, so we don't get that satisfying pop, but that's okay. Here we're pouring onto the glass. Alright, so right off the bat, let's talk about the color. So right off the bat, it is a little hard to describe in just one word. It is a very rich yellow, very almost golden. I think like almost golden raisin in color. It reminds you of like that golden hour sort of color, almost like honey. So if I were to simmer it down to a word or two as far as the color, it's exactly that, honey and golden hour. Also, while I'm letting it breathe for a little bit, I want to take this time to also talk a little bit more about the components that make up this blend. The only two single malts that I was able to find is that Cragganmore and Glendolin. However, the blend is also composed specifically of scotches from the Highlands and the Speyside regions. So it's not going to have that very strong, smoky type of profile that scotches from, like, Islay, for example, would have. Alright, through the magic of editing, it has been enough time that Grand Old Parr has been able to breathe a little bit. So let's take a little whiff and see what we can catch. Right off the bat, immediately vanilla. But it's not that strong vanilla that we normally get from bourbons, because that's a punch of vanilla. This is very subtle. It's like little hints of like vanilla extract, if you will. Just like a tiny little hint. But it's also accompanied with a bit of spice. Almost like, I think like nutmeg. And at the end, there's a little bit of like citrus, actually. Almost like a kind of like a little acidity to the smell. It's actually kind of interesting. So it starts out very sweet, like vanilla, almost honey actually. And then as you continue to smell it, it gets a little bit more complex with more of like baking spices and then almost like an acidity, but it's not an unpleasant type of acidity. It's actually quite pleasant. Actually, there towards the end, there's a tiny hint of smoke, but it's again not like an Islay type of smoke. It's not a punch. It's not a campfire type of smoke. It's very mild, so actually kind of pleasant. But alright, let's get to the tasting profile. It's actually a really good scotch. Some blended scotches get a bit of a bad rep because it's a blend, for lack of a better term. It's a blend of different scotches, so some people could argue that there's less control of what the end product's going to be like. But Grand Old Parr, every time I've had it, I've enjoyed it, and right off the bat, you get sweetness followed by smoke. So that honey and vanilla followed by a tiny hint of smoke, and towards the finish, there's a bit of that acidity that I was talking about. So the palate follows through with the nose. You get that honey, vanilla sort of sweetness, but again, very mild, but very present. And the same thing can be said for the smoke. It's a very mild whiskey, but it still holds its weight. So with that being said, what's the overall vibe of this whiskey? Honestly, with everything that we've talked about, I can't help but think of Grand Old Parr as part of Grandpa's library. Not that my grandpa had a library, but I could see it being part of the shelf decoration that he would on occasion use. So I could definitely see this whiskey sitting on a bookshelf next to a chair where he would sit and read and tell stories to his grandkids. So stories being the prominent theme of the episode and of this whiskey, and of the book too. I could definitely picture a grandpa taking sips of Grand Old Parr as he's walking with his grandkids through the library once they're a little older and telling them, pick out any book that you like and read it. Which, now that I'm actually thinking about it, and I promise you, this part was not scripted, it draws a really neat parallel, because in the story of Shadow of the Wind, Daniel's dad takes him to the Cemetery of Forgotten Books and tells him, pick out any book that you like and take care of it, because that is your book. That is now your child, basically. So it's actually really interesting that the vibes of both just kind of clash, or not clash, they mash. They join in the middle so well, I think. And it's actually really interesting because when I was reading Shadow of the Wind, I was talking about it to my wife, and I was telling her this feels like a story that a grandpa would be telling his grandkids as a bedtime story. It almost feels like a story from his youth. So it's really cool to think of both the vibe of the book and of the whiskey have such strong parallels, which, I mean, it's actually the point of the show. So, yay. Job well done. And here's the funny thing. Grand Old Parr, I assume, has that vibe for not just me, but for a lot of people. And here's why. Grand Old Parr was released in 1909 for the first time. And it has been such a strong and almost dominant part of the whiskey industry that I wouldn't be surprised if many people felt the same way, of them seeing their parents and grandparents drinking this. I saw a study the other day that approximately 10% of the whiskey market in Latin America was by Grand Old Parr. So 10% of all sales were Grand Old Parr. 52% in Colombia. So over half of all whiskey sold in Colombia were Grand Old Parr. And I know for a fact that in Mexico it has a strong hold, and it does in many other countries. So I wouldn't be surprised at all that many people felt the exact same way. Something else that I was actually kind of thinking about, it is very interesting to think of that resemblance of stories and of grandpas with this whiskey, because if you think about it, the bottle, how I mentioned earlier, it's a little wrinkled, so it almost kind of resembles like a grandparent's skin, just wrinkled with time. But then you get those sweet and honey, sweet vanilla notes that almost represent that care and tenderness that grandparents tend to have with their grandchildren. But then you get that smoky and almost like musky sort of notes with this whiskey, which can draw parallel to the fictional library that I'm talking about. So really, Grand Old Parr, for me, and I imagine for a lot of people too, is not just a bottle. There's a feeling attached to it. It's the kind of whiskey that grandparents drank, that showed up at holidays and made me throw up at the punch bowl and ruin the family reunion. But it's a staple. It's an essential part of that family history, which just draws so many parallels to the story of Daniel and Shadow of the Wind. But that's just about what I have for y'all today. To sum it all up, Grand Old Parr 12-year isn't just a whiskey. It feels inherited. It feels like something that your grandparents poured, your parents shared, and now it's in your glass. Shadow of the Wind feels the same way. Like, it's not just a story. It's a story that you're stepping into. Almost like you're stepping into one of your grandparents' bedtime stories. Before I do my usual sign out, I want to take this opportunity to give a very special shout out, and that is to all of my cousins. You see, a few weeks ago, I was around my entire family, and it was more than just a reunion. It was a celebration, because my cousin is having a baby, and we are just so excited to welcome my cousin's child into the world, and the newest member of the Martinez family. I don't know if I have my cousin's permission. I actually haven't reached out yet, so I'll reach out to see if I have her permission to say names. However, I'll just leave it at that. My cousin is having a child, and we are just so excited to celebrate the newest member of the family. So after the baby shower, everyone got together at an aunt's house to celebrate, and to continue celebrating, as a matter of fact. And we were having cake, having drinks. We were watching the soccer game because my dad just had to watch the soccer game. It's not even the World Cup yet, but he just had to. So we're all there gathered, and out of nowhere, my cousin Javier comes in. So to paint a picture, I'm inside the house talking to a cousin of mine about movies with one of our little nephews, and my cousin Javier walks in, and he says, "Hey, they're talking about your show outside." And so I had to be part of this conversation. So I go, and my wife is talking to everyone, answering questions. And as soon as I get there, they start asking me questions. In a little opportunity that I had, I asked my wife, "Hey, how did the conversation come up?" And she's the one that told me. Javier brought it up. He mentioned the show to all the cousins, and everybody started asking questions. And it meant a lot to me. So Javier, to give y'all a bit of a background, he is the life of the party if you know him. He is going to be a guest in next season, and y'all are not ready for that episode. That is going to be probably my wildest episode, period. Not just to date, but ever. So get ready. Next season is going to be awesome. But Javier has been a supporter of the show. He asks, "Hey, how's recording going? How does it go?" But not just that. He has been a big supporter of me for years. He was actually the first person in the family that I told that I was going to propose to my wife. He is someone that I've shared a lot of really wild stories with, and I feel very lucky to have him not just as my cousin, but have him as my bro. And not just him, but everyone else in the family. I feel very, very lucky, very blessed. And to my other cousin, who, again, I don't know if I can name her or her child, especially her child. I want to respect, privacy. But I am so excited for her. And given the fact that I am talking about the whiskey that our grandpa drank, I felt it very appropriate to raise this glass and toast to y'all, toast to the new member of the family, and say that I love you. So let's pretend that we're actually clinking glasses. But with all that being said, this has been Lit Whiskey Wednesday, where the lit stands for literature. I am your host, Adrian Martinez, and we are so close to the end of Season 1. This has been a great ride. I am so excited for next episode. I am so excited for Season 2. And I will catch y'all on the next one.